You might hear the gentle rustle of waterproof jackets as we prepare ourselves for the on-off of the British weather. We are currently stood at the foot, I'm probably actually standing on his feet, sorry Eric, of Eric Arthur Blair, aka George Orwell. It is his birthday today. Let's say happy birthday, George Orwell.
Happy birthday, George Orwell.
And we've come here every year. This is the 9th year. There's always new faces. A few people have had to go due to extreme tiredness. He's only 1 year old, and so his father has taken him away. And whilst we get ready for the rains that are about to come, and we may move into the pub, I just want to get just a brief few words from everybody. Who are you? Why are you here?
I'm Dave. What am I? I'm something. I'm a developer. I'm here because Christian was going to disown me if I didn't turn up after promising every time for the last, and it's great.
At least 5 years. Yeah.
I'm the other Christian. I'm a geek, and I'm here because I came last year, having not been, and I absolutely really enjoyed it, just as a very random, enjoyable day of celebration.
I'm Alexe. I came with the other Christian because he said it was good last year.
And I'm Bill. I'm just travelling the world at the moment because I can, and I'm staying with Charlie and Hannah, but very pleased to be here today.
My name's Hannah. I'm here to honour the man who gave us the first warnings of the technocratic agenda that is coming down the pike.
I'm Clay, also known as Soul Cruiser on Twitter, and I'm here because I've been here the last 3 or 4 years. I just love the conversations that we have standing around the grave here, so it's fantastic.
I'm Charlie. I'm here with Hannah, whose voice you heard earlier, and I'm a writer and fan of Mr. Blair.
This Mr. Blair.
This Mr. Blair, yeah.
Amanda, regular, just come here to honour Eric Arthur Blair and to have good conversation with good people.
Somebody just walked up in time.
Yeah, I've just come for the wedding in the church, but I saw you guys. I thought this would probably be more interesting.
There are 2 Bilderberg shirts here. It's interesting that over the last 9 years or so, Bilderberg has been woven in and out of the narrative because many of us come here to have conversations about society, about civil liberties, about our relationship with our government or governments when there's been multiple countries here. Charlie, you were at, as was Tony, and as were yourself. At the Bilderberg meeting
Near
it. Oh, near it. Yes. Okay. Yeah, you were. Yeah, automatically you're on someone's hit list. You were very close to the people meeting.
Yeah. I was sat between Eric Schmidt and the King of Holland. Yeah.
Can you give me a review in a few words?
Well, it was a fun time. The German police, they scored about 3 out of 10. Not as good as the Danish or the British police, who are both lovely. It was 3 days of phone spoofing, machine guns and Secret Service, and us doing our best to report on it.
And how did the reporting go? Because you've championed some of the more recent, more in-depth reporting for The Guardian over the last, is it 4 years?
I've done it since 2009.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's getting on. But,
we've only read it recently, though, obviously.
We were just talking about it earlier, about how the kind of rhetoric around the Bilderberg Group itself is changing, and about how the newspapers and news on TV and radio is starting to talk about it more seriously, like a serious political summit, which is what it is. So that's great. So, yeah.
Explain to me the parade. That was really interesting to hear your take on that.
Yeah, it's got called the Walk of Shame by some. The parade to dinner of the delegates in front of this, all the activists and press who were there, was sort of one side of a steel fence, and everyone, all the delegates dressed up to the nines, walked to dinner in front of us across a courtyard in a kind of strange display. It was a little bit Hunger Games. It's particularly when Henry Kissinger walked across the courtyard. He was met with, I wouldn't say cheers and joy, it was just a wall of boos and howls of rage, and that was quite interesting, but not necessarily a healthy dynamic for all concerned.
Can I say something about that?
Of course you can, because let me introduce you first. Tony Gosling, the person that when I was first, late night, maybe 2 a.m, Googling things, falling down wormholes, finding a little bit about Bilderberg. It was your website that I think at the time the world's #1 resource for the Bilderberg Group.
Well, look, what I'd say about the Walk of Shame is just shows what a theatre the policing is, because you've got a wall of police around the conference centre, all the latest high-tech stuff, snipers and everything, defending these people from any kind of intrusion or listening in. And yet there they go, then they start wandering out through this barrier into the ordinary world of the rest of us. And it shows, I think, that is actually just theatre in a way. And also that what you get is you get the people like Jacob Wallenberg, James A. Johnson, who I spoke to. These characters actually meld into the background perfectly, because we do not know the faces or even the names of the people that really run the world. I mean, we're always hearing reports that Kissinger is right in the centre of these conferences, and he's making decisions, I think, about who's going to be next prime ministers and this kind of thing. That's basically what they're about. They're a vetting procedure where new possible potential politicians come in, they get vetted by Kissinger effectively. For example, over in Germany, we've just heard that the favourite person this is from some security guards inside the conference talking to Germans just in the last few days after the conference, quite a while after the conference, that you've got the German defence minister, is it Frank von Ayens, that's right. It looks like that she's now fated to take over from Merkel. So the German people aren't going to get a say. Well, we'll see. Obviously, we can't tell. A bit like Boris Johnson taking over here, it almost looks certain that he's going to be the Prime Minister. But this is the way things are done behind the scenes. And I think Bilderberg is a great way of looking at how it's done quietly.
A lot of this is more documented now than ever before. Yet, show of hands, put your hands up if you voted in Brexit. Okay, so I would say 95% of this group. Now, it might not have been relevant to some because he flew in a day late from New Zealand.
I knew my vote didn't matter.
Your vote didn't matter? No, exactly.
Yeah,
but I would have given you a spare one of a friend that couldn't be bothered. Why? Why did you vote? If we might not necessarily have any control on a lot of this.
I voted because I thought my vote actually counted in this particular scenario.
Difficult one, because I very nearly didn't. I kind of felt an obligation out of character to my past and the people that have given me this option too. But I still toyed with spoiling votes and all sorts. So, out of obligation, I think.
I voted because after having studied Bilderberg for 7 or 8 years and looking at how they were spearheading the idea of this federal union, this European Union, and looking at some of the archived documents where indeed we do have some minutes. We don't have any minutes of the more recent meetings, but some, here and there in archives you can find documents where they're talking about this union in the 50s and 60s, and they're talking about how they want to do it with no regard to democracy or to popular opinion. They just want to get this done. The CIA were really sort of funding the European movement and going for it. And I was shocked at that time. I was really thought it was a great idea. It was a very idealistic idea. We live a lot of the time in Portugal. We're going to stand to lose a lot from this financially. But having looked into the background of it, how it was conceived, how it was carried out, I was shocked, and I voted for Brexit.
Hannah made me vote. I voted because I think it was very important to vote. It was quite a high turnout, 72 point something %, and I think that's a good. I think that's a good result. The best result is the turnout, I think. Obviously, I voted Leave, which I know isn't necessarily amongst my peers is a very unusual position to have, and actually I was quite vocal in social media, which I felt I had to be, because there was I think social media and this vote have been very, very interesting to watch. And we were just talking earlier about the kind of bubbles that people live in, both in social media and in the real world. And there perhaps wasn't much crossover in conversation between the two voting parts of this referendum, perhaps not as much as they should have been.
What sold it to you then? The thought of leaving.
I think do you know, if I had to boil it down to anything, it would be the statement made by the President of the European Commission, Juncker, where he says over and over again, you can look this up just in most newspapers, about his attitude to democracy and politics and referendum and public opinion. He has a very, very low opinion of national opinion. He just doesn't like it at all. He kind of doesn't. They find it. A lot of these technocrats find it slightly annoying that people get to have their say. So I had my say.
I almost know what Tony's going to say.
I just wanted to say I voted because it was the right thing to do, because women died for this. Even if it doesn't mean anything, it's making a point and teaching our children that it's important.
Well, you know what? The older generation voted for Brexit, most definitely. And also people in the sort of industrial heartland of the north of England and the Midlands all voted for Brexit quite strongly. I noticed also that today, literally this is the day after the results have been announced, BBC are reporting, the BBC are reporting that...
Yeah, hang on, you work for the BBC.
I used to. Somebody has started a petition, and this apparently is headline news, that we are about, because there weren't only 75% of people voted in this, that isn't a proper vote, and that we're going to have another referendum. This is actually reported...
I think it was the ratio. It was the ratio, because if Farage said exactly the same. He said, if this is going to be a 52-48, then we are definitely going to have a revote. Then the moment it happened, he was like, I'm off to the pub.
We're back to the days of the Lisbon Treaty, aren't they? Unless you vote in a referendum in the right way, then you're not. We're going to have it all over again. And I think particularly, they were trying to put this off. They've been trying to put it off for years, because the older generation, the elders of the tribe, would be voting for Brexit, and the longer they leave it, the less of those will be left, because they can remember the days before the EU.
So interestingly, in this group, there might even be a 50-50 Brexit state. Dave, stay. Why?
Stay. Why?
If you did, I mean, I don't know. I haven't actually asked you.
I did. It was complicated. It took me a long time to make the decision, so it wasn't black and white. I wasn't always going to vote that way. I got to a certain threshold of information where I thought, if I carry on thinking about it, I'm going to miss the deadline. And I mainly voted, in a way, shameless to say, despite my criticism of people voting exit being considered to vote by reflex, I kind of did myself. I thought I thought about it. I had a lot of information. I didn't think the problems we have in the country would be solved by this exit. So when I'd reached that point, I voted Remain. It seemed to be a gamble to me, but that's the way it went.
I've been really vocal about mine, and I don't know why I was so... I mean, because listening to Charlie and Tony talk, often in various channels and other spaces, I'm constantly aware of this... I'm going to hesitate to say the word illusion, but the mechanisms that happen behind all of this. I will always vote, and I will vote for what my head believes in before what my heart feels that I should do.
It was mainly gut, right? Yeah. So there was a moral sense to it.
That's where my brain is.
I despite appearances, I'm not sophisticated intellectually, and I tend to vote. I tend to vote emotionally, which is probably wrong, but there's value to that, right? So I agree with you that I don't believe the mechanisms, the powers that be, will change despite what's happening on the surface. But I do know who my enemy is.
No one has said, have they? Centralisation of power. This is what's happening.
Well, yeah.
500 million people all being governed by politicians that we
are you governed by these people?
We have voted.
You feel under their thumb?
Well, we are. I mean, ministers, government ministers we elect are having to implement legislation which is coming across their desk from Brussels. And I mean, I've got nothing against these foreign countries. In fact, one of the things we found at Bilderberg...
I love that. So hang on, let me just put on a t-shirt. I've got nothing against these foreign countries.
But one of the things, but what we found at the Bilderberg conference was that there are people from all over Europe that actually want Brexit. They want someone to send a message to Brussels saying, you cannot run 500 million people across Europe as a machine run by failed politicians. You can't do it anymore.
And this is undeniable that a lot of people over Europe want Brexit. There's also, as we've seen, this almost 50-50 split of people that, in the UK, for example, don't. And I do find this split, we were talking about this fracturing, really interesting. You were going to say something.
Yeah, what terrifies me, and it's a bit conspiracy theory, it's terrifying, but I think it's valid, is what I've noticed it's interesting you said centralisation of power. So that's happening, centralisation of riches and resources in the hands of the few. And we were talking earlier about, is it 1984 or is it Brave New World? And all of the stuff that Orwell predicted, I think, has come to pass, has actually been and gone. Like having to newspeak, having to change your language to fool people, this kind of stuff and control. We've gone past that where politicians like Donald Trump are seen as almost comedians. What they say is considered hilarious. It's reported in a lot of ways like entertainment. And Farage says, we did it without a single bullet being fired. That these are politicians, like the dialogue and the way they're talking is almost as if it doesn't matter anymore. It's done. Right? That's what terrifies me. I don't want to really believe that. But the conduct and the dialogue and the narrative that politicians are engaged in now is almost if I can cast off comments about the value of human life, I can make racist comments. It's not going to affect my ability to win an election. That's the thing that I'm trying to deal with right now.
Speaking of racist comments, I'm going to go over to...
Why, you're coming in because I'm black or because
No, you had to drop that in there. I'm coming over here because you are the American in the group, right, gotcha. And we've mentioned American a lot. That was kind of a bad segue. And I was nodding over to you to say I'm bringing the microphone over because Trump, your opinion, being close to the American news, you still pay a lot of attention, but although you've been over in England, married, and I never think of you as an American. How long have you been here?
16 years now.
Yeah, so he's still got to lose that accent to assimilate. I'm just trying to get into the Brexit mindset. No, how do you feel?
About Trump and what's going on in the States? For me, it was kind of shocking. One, because I spent so much time in the military. I spent about 11 years in the military, and in the way that he speaks, it kind of goes against everything that I was brought up to believe and everything I was brought up to that the state stood for. So I was kind of shocked that he's gotten as far as he has by some of the comments, some of the views and things that he has. It just seems to be against what America has traditionally stood for, at least how I was raised at any rate. But then you got to think, is there some underlying sentiment that's been hidden, that's been there, just been waiting for an opportunity to be able to surface, and then, in a forum, you probably wouldn't say it if you're in face-to-face, but now with social media and the way that it can link people together, if I make this comment, then I've got other people that will support me in that. So now I got some safety, or I got a community that I can rally around, so maybe I feel more free to say what I want to say. So I think it's interesting times for me in relationship to where things are going to go in the States.
Have you ever considered settling back in the States?
No, I think I'm over here.
Unless now
you guys are going to kick out all the foreigners as well. So, yeah.
And you don't. Do you feel threatened?
No.
No, I don't know. I wanted to apologise to everybody that was visiting, living, settled here for God knows how many years. As a child of, parents who were children of refugees. For me, I just felt like it was a really xenophobic act, and yet.
Well, you say that, but there are people there are. I don't know how many Labour politicians voted for Brexit. Something like 10. I'm going to get that number, but people like Dennis Skinner. So you can. There's an argument being made for Brexit coming from a traditional working class leftist position, and in fact,
UKIP's polluted it. Could it be? UKIP have polluted the...
I think they're very different. They're very different arguments, and there's the Tony Benn school of Euroscepticism, which isn't as strong now as it was 10 years ago. But that's still when there's been a lot of chatter on social media and particularly about those racists who voted Leave, but that doesn't take account of very particularly a leftist critique of the European kind of political structures, which would be represented by people like Tony Benn, and who is very much a champion of personal freedom. So it's difficult. I think that it behoves the people in the Remain camp at least to address that set of beliefs, as well as they're very easy to attack more xenophobic beliefs, which absolutely are obviously there. in certain
I'd just
numbers.
like to say, as the daughter of an immigrant, my father's Palestinian, came over obviously to get an education and a decent life. I voted for Brexit, and I do think that if we look at who was lobbying for Remain, if we look at who was funding the Remain campaign, I don't want to ally myself with those forces. So we'll go back to Bilderberg, because they were a big Remain stronghold. You've got Airbus lobbying for Remain. You've got Michael O'Leary from Ryanair lobbying for Remain. You have Goldman Sachs there, who funded the Remain campaign. You have JP Morgan, who were funding the Remain campaign. So you've got Henri de Castries from AXA. You've got Anna Botan, CEO of Santander. You've got all of these really big players in the Remain campaign. I mean, there would not be a Remain campaign were it not for those people, the steering committee of Bilderberg.
Did that steer your opinion more than any of the media chit chat outside of the niche media that might actually be talking about what Bilderberg's doing? Because mainstream media was not talking about any of this.
Well, they weren't, but you've got to just, and Tony made a really good point, is you've got to put faces to these names, to these corporations. When I see Klaus Kleinfeld, director of Morgan Stanley, walking across with Helen Goodman on our Treasury Select Committee, Labour MP, big Remainer, I see them walking across together to an Airbus dinner funded by Thomas Enders. This is and followed, by Michael O'Leary from Ryanair. This is the nexus of power. These people created the Remain campaign, and for whatever reasons, and obviously there are good things about the European Union, and in certain quarters it is very idealistic. It is lovely to think we can all work together. There's all these funds and grants, charity, and NGOs are really devastated now, because they're now thinking, where is our funding going to come from? We have to now trust that our system will provide MPs who are going to look after those interests.
Science being hit particularly bad.
Exactly, but it's up to us now. Yes, we took back control of our democracy, but now we need to take back control of Westminster. And if you're worried about MPs not looking after your interests, you get out there, you stand for it, and you vote in the MPs who are going to look after our interests, because it's a beautiful system, but we've been neglectful of it and we've been apathetic.
Interesting. And we were talking about this system at the moment. Me and Charlie were talking about, I'd love to hear Tony's take on this as well. Trump, and when we talk about democracy, we look at America as not necessarily actually qualifying. Yeah. So the game that we see being played out between Trump and Clinton, buddies, pals, holidaying together, has it just got out of hand, do you think?
Well, look, I mean, why haven't you mentioned Bernie Sanders? This guy has been completely shut out of the process. You've got no democracy in America. If he was the Democratic candidate, he would probably win the election, almost certainly. But because he's been sidelined by the system, that is basically cheating by the pro-Hillary Clinton people in the Democratic Party. But look, Bilderberg, a lot of these people, I mean, I don't want to I shouldn't repeat it too much, but keep an eye on them. The mainstream media, the London media, I call it, because almost all our national and international coverage in Britain comes from London, which is not the case actually in Germany. I mean, Frankfurt and other regional cities have a big part in the national media in Germany. It doesn't happen in Britain. And these people have been behind the lies and the spin post 9/11 about the whole war on terror. They're also looking the other way when the real power brokers are deciding who is going to be taking over our political systems in the future. Look, for example, Henri de Castries. Hannah's just said it. Yeah, he's the chairman of AXA. He's slated to take over as chairman of HSBC possibly later this year, which of course is a criminal bank started basically for money laundering and through drug smuggling and the opium wars, this kind of thing in Hong Kong originally. But the whole problem is the London media is not doing its job. Why aren't they looking at what Henri de Castries is saying weeks ago, which was, there's going to be a vote for Brexit. We need to keep an eye on these people, and the London media are deliberately looking the other way.
Tony, you know why? Because of the advertising model. It demands clicks, and there's only about 8 people that's going to be interested in that.
Well, it's
And they're here.
capitalism is sort of
Click a lot.
capitalism is in its death throes. I think since 2008, there's not any proper real capitalism, and there hasn't been proper capitalism. And what's happening is the people, for example, the bailouts that were given in 2008 have been used for lobbying, for buying up any kind of potential opposition. That includes political parties and it includes the media.
I'm looking down at some roses which were requested by Eric Arthur Blair on his grave, the English rose he wanted. Would he have been leave? Would he have been remain?
I don't think anyone.
Why am I asking you? Why am I asking you, Mr. Brexit?
What I would say about Henri de Castries, he made and this is relevant to Mr. Blair here. He was asked in a conference a few weeks before this Bilderberg, and this is the guy he's the chairman of the Bilderberg Steering Committee, and as Tony said, slated to become head of HSBC. He's on the board of HSBC already. Anyway, he was asked at a conference, the guy asked him, so, Mr. de Castries, do you think, is privacy dead? And he went, yeah. And that's quite a chilling thing. He's the guy who runs the world's biggest insurance company, and he's absolutely quite clear on the fact that privacy is dead. And this is an industry which thrives on big data and data we're throwing out and pumping out into the world. So, it's a sad thing.
He probably listened to some of our audio from 2010 when we came to the very same conclusion. That was almost like the turning point for us when initially we came naively concerned about CCTV and those cameras which most often aren't on. And then we suddenly realised that the data that was being collected en masse was way more useful, so much more powerful. Even the metadata, it's just metadata you don't need to worry about, that was going to paint a much broader, more amazing picture than ever before. I wonder if this is a reason why Dave, for example, sometimes spends a lot of time in the woods under a tarp, deviceless.
It's difficult for me. So I work for The Economist. I'm a developer. I'm a freelancer, so I can fire them if I want. I might just fucking do that now. Sorry, but because I think the Rothschilds are still on their board or whatever. It's a business, right? News is secondary to these people. So oh my god, I feel bad. But anyway,
so your second name's not on here,
but
yet.
I'm So I use technology to make my living. I've got a family, but I also do a lot of open source stuff, and I still believe in the ability of technology to make a change for the better. It's a very powerful thing, right? So being a hacker or whatever you are, you've got some tools that can, I think, maybe one of the last frontiers where you can actually make some change. So I do a lot of other stuff. And, not everything we do there is bad. But I question my employer. I'm sure we all question our own employers because they're owned by somebody, right? Especially the bigger ones. But I do try and counter, but not just getting into the woods, that's just my thing. But technically, me and you have done some stuff together, right? So you can open barriers, there's still data, you're right, floating about, which can be scraped by anyone, but there are certain things you can do to encrypt we still have tools to do encryption, right?
There's a meeting recently by the originators of the web, the architects of the original web saying, okay, it's got out of hand now. Let's build another one that can't be tampered with.
Well, the vision of the internet, the World Wide Web, is not what Tim Berners-Lee wanted, right? And let's not forget the original internet was a military tool. It was designed to provide a network that would basically survive a nuclear attack.
As was Tor.
And most technology most powerful technology comes from the military or the military industrial complex. We just have the ability to kind of tweak and mutate it in different ways, right? So the internet has been co-opted. We know that. We were talking earlier about Facebook being invisible like water. I use it, and I never used to. It just happened. It's like coffee, right? I question the platform, but I still use the platform, right? So I'm complicit in a way through my complacency. So I'm trying to work on that. I want to go back to my roots and think we can hack, like in the best possible sense of the word, we can turn these tools on their head.
Just a very quick question about The Economist. Quick comment. Did you know that the editor-in-chief always attends Bilderberg?
Right.
Always. So
I didn't know that.
Has always attended. Now, of course, he's chief of Bloomberg. She was there. We have pictures, but I don't think. Do they report on it?
I don't think they. Do you know what? I'm on the internet now, so I'll get back to you on that. But I do.
There's a gap in
my views are not representative. I don't know. But the Economist they consider themselves liberal, and they support free markets, and they have supported globalization, but they changed their tack quite a lot.
2 board members also. So we have John Elkan from the Fiat family, and also Alex Karp, CEO of Palantir, has now been brought in by Elkan to be another director of The Economist.
The closeness of Palantir and The Economist is, when you've got the head of one of the world's biggest kind of surveillance companies there, right in the middle of a very traditional finance paper.
Interesting. Their byline, I don't know, I'll try and get it right, is one of the... So they've been going since 1843, right? Ancient organisation.
Way before Bilderberg.
But their kind of tagline is the whatever it is, I'll find out the real one, but it's in essence the fight of reason against ignorance, which sounds reasonable, but I almost heard that being bandied around during Brexit as reason is remain, ignorance is leave. These are propaganda statements that can be abused. Right, so everyone who reads, I was very conscious when the editor was doing that a lot of people are going to The Economist for what they consider to be deep analysis and unbiased and reasonable analysis, and they weren't necessarily what they were getting.
The Economist breaks rule number 1 in journalism, that is no bylines.
Yes.
What you get in The Economist is you get an article from The Economist. Now, the reason that journalists like me demand bylines is because if you get something wrong, or if someone else finds something else out about the subject, they can get directly in touch with the journalist, you can correct it, and you can maybe even write another article based on the new information that you've got. That's why we do what we do. But The Economist, you won't get any of those. The other thing with them is they do sometimes, I believe, they've mentioned Bilderberg once or twice, but always in a kind of positive light, and from the Bilderberg spin point of view. They did once, in a Christmas edition, I think it was 1987, obviously the editor wasn't on duty for that Christmas edition, someone else was in the chair. They did mention Bilderberg as, they called it ne plus ultra in Latin. That means nothing more above this. They were looking at a whole bunch of different lobby groups. So they finished their little description with, when you have reached the Bilderberg, you have arrived. So The Economist do report on it, but not officially, and only when it's on a Christmas edition with some new editor having a bit of a laugh. And we get the similar with our newspaper in Bristol. Sometimes at a weekend edition, you'll get, someone with a weekend editor that's not the main editor, you'll get some truth on the front page, like we had 9/11 the bombs theory as the main headline on our Bristol regional newspaper, because the main editor was out of his chair and they had someone else there. So much to think about, so much to discuss. The rain has started again. We've had sunshine, we've had rain, we've had sunshine, we're back to rain. This is a first. The changeability of minds. Will we all be feeling the same way in the not too distant future? Let's finish with some hope. What does each person here hope for the next 5 years? Okay, well, I just think we've got a very switched-on generation, particularly the youngsters with the using social media, although there's attempts already to control that. I noticed that an Israeli has just been brought into Facebook to try and control their algorithms to get rid of the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign, for example. But there's, I think, healthy cynicism amongst young people about whether our system is working or not, and I'm relying on them to carry on our work into the future.
I hope I learn to use social media a bit better. I'll be coming to you for tips on that, Christian.
In the right place.
Yeah, and I hope that we still live in a world where social media. I echo Tony that where we can share information and views, and for there to be a freedom of opinion in those dialogues.
And a similar line, I think the hope for me would be that we use social media for other than just goofing off, but actually starting to share information, to think, to question, to become more aware.
Coming just after the Brexit vote, I hope that we can heal the divides that we do see now, and that kind of that passion that we have on either side that can be put to good use, and we can work together, because we need to stop the name calling and realise that we do actually just want the same thing. Most of us, we just want a fair country where people are taken care of, and we want a transparent government, and I hope that we can come together and work towards that.
I think from what I've seen there's going to be a period of wailing and gnashing of teeth, which has to be got through, and then there's a need for someone like Trump, in inverted commas, to come along and make Britain great again, because Britain's a great...
You don't even live here.
Britain's a great...
Go back to New Zealand.
No, but Britain is a great country. I mean, crazy to be sort of all mumbling and moaning about it.
When was it great the last time? I mean, you're older than any of us here, so you're going to know.
Yeah, which was in 28th of October 1965. It was great when I left, yeah.
Just for the World Cup, hang on, you missed the climax.
I did, but no, I left and it was in good shape. It was in very good shape, and I think it should be again.
We can trade globally now.
Well, Britain has got
Directly
good people,
Africa,
good entrepreneurs,
China.
and there's a lot of space out there.
I hope that we can work together more, I agree. And I'd like to see more positive messages and more positivity across social media.
I'm going to hope that I'm just going to carry on with my usual blind ignorance of all of it and just enjoy people day to day, with a little bit of the conspiracy theory stroke truth of not being able to control it. But actually I'm going to celebrate 5 more birthdays with some very different people with very different experiences, opinions and ideas, and feel that we've got a familiarity and some friendship just by being different and stepping outside of our bubbles.
I totally agree in educating the youth. And one thing that happened, which was, I was so proud of this, and this is just my son's natural nature, right? So we do teach them about democracy, and we do, without alarming them, we just say, this is what's right, this is what's wrong, this is what you need to fight for, do it. But the moment when David Cameron, it's another one of these things where he basically insulted Corbyn in the House by saying wear a proper tie and sing the national anthem, that glorious moment in our history, I just sat there, I was kind of, a bit heartbroken, but my son just said, that man is a bully. And if I was there, I would slap him in the face. And I just sat there with my wife and I went, we've got nothing to worry about. So he naturally knew, he didn't buy the line, he wasn't cynical. He's very young, he's 8 years old, but he instinctively knew that. So I'm just going to try and build on that. My time's not over, and I resist cynicism, and I resist my feeling that there's little I can do. I still don't quite believe that, but my focus is on not just my children, any children I meet, to take that fight forward.
Just hope that we can rebuild our communities and find peace and get the truth out there and work out what's going to happen next.
I want to echo so many interesting, I nearly said valid, it's not for me to validate anything. I agree with so much, everything in some shape or form, but I want to add that as much as we are plugged into the network of noughts and ones, I love the fact that we are stood here. We've actually taken the time and the effort to come and stand in the rain in the physical space. My social network will always be in the physical space above anything else, and I hope that we can have these backup networks, these collectives, these meetings, maybe even times when you drop your devices into a box and go and actually feel that you can speak freely like we feel like we can do right here, right now. I think that's what Eric would have wanted. It's probably why he had a house right in the outskirts of Scotland, away from everybody and people. And I hope that we can do this again, and for the next 5 years we can start having kind of a look back and a reflection on where we are right now, where we're going, and how we can make that journey better for everybody. Thank you very much, everybody. Should we go to the pub?
Thank you.
Thank you.